Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So today it won't be a full Viper Tech Airsoft review just yet. Don't worry, that will be coming out soon. But today's kind of more of like a preview, trailer, a teaser, whatever you want to call it, video, and where we're going to take kind of a more of like a historical approach when compared to the talk about the real steel history a little bit more. Mainly because I guess if you every airsofter out there wants to kind of have this build, and there's just not a lot of good information or videos out there. You kind of have to like do your own research and kind of find a lot of mixed things, and you're just kind of really confused, and there's just not a really solid place to look, and everyone has different opinions. Most players, like myself included, when you're looking around for products, you'll probably stumble upon one of those Larry Vickers videos, actually, where he actually talks about his Model 727, and actually I found out the channel actually, and actually there was a lot of good stuff on there, and his stuff is actually pretty entertaining, actually. So I'm by no means an expert, obviously. This is just something as another airsofter, we just look into it, and we like to talk about it. And this is what I found from my research and from my understanding of what's out there. So of course this is going to be more of a kind of a parody of like the Larry Vickers channel's content. Now I know the real steel community just hates it, just rags on airsofters, right? When we kind of talk about the real steel and when we pretend these airsoft are kind of like the real steel, it's not. I realize that they're used for a totally different thing. Take it easy. But this is more kind of a fun thing that's kind of a parody. Now, I don't know if Larry Vickers is a subscriber of this channel, but I hope he watches this video and kind of get a good laugh out of it. But maybe might be able to do one of those Larry at the movies and critique this video. So I hope you guys enjoy. This segment brought to you by Alpha Company USA. Alright gang, so today we have here a true moonrock. Two vintage Colt Car-15 classics. And of course, back then, everyone called them Car-15. No one knew what their names were. Of course, later on, we know that they're called, for the catalog number, they're called the Colt Model 733. That's this one right here. This is a different one called Car-15, but we also know this more as the XM177. This particular model happens to be the one that was an E2 version that later was converted to an E1 because that's a shorter barrel. Now today we're going to be talking about this one right here. So this thing, we're in a real treat, gang. So not too many of these have been made, and a lot of them have been very, very confusing. Of all the AR or M16 platforms that are out there, this Model 733 is one of the most confusing in terms of how to build it accurate to the original, since there were just so many different variations out there. Let's start though from the rear. Model 733, we start out with the collapsible buttstock right here. This is a polymer based one right here, as you can tell. Now, you might be wondering though, how do I know if this was different from the other models here? Because this XM177 here also had a collapsible stock that looks similar. But as y'all know, this one right here is made of aluminum, but just coated in some kind of, don't quote me to this, but some kind of nylon or some kind of nylon layering right here. So it's coated outside, but still ultimately an aluminum stock. Now, the way you can tell though is if you look for the little ribs right here. These little ribs here are designed to reinforce the stock, the polymer stock. So if you see them here, you'll know that's a third generation stock that are designed for these things. If you don't see one, most likely that's going to be an aluminum stock. Now be careful though, that's not a foolproof, because sometimes there are stocks that are replicas. This is a post-production model, of course, so they couldn't source the original part, so they made it plastic or polymer of some sort. But that's kind of how the original ones were formed. Now moving on though, you'll notice these stocks are 2-position stocks. This is again post-production model, so they included 5-position, but in the olden days we had 2 positions, all the way in, all the way out like this or so. Now of course, as you know, you'd always take it to the armory, mark it perfectly where you want the perfect length of pull, have it marked, have the armor guys drill a hole in there, and it worked like a champ, right? You got that perfect length of pull for what you're looking for. Stock wobble, not a whole lot you can do about that, right? But hey, you get used to it, like you guys in Della does, all right? So you know it's gonna be good, but again, just that part works like a champ. Moving forward though here, now you got into the receiver section. This is an area that gets super confusing. Now, all the Model 733s were actually built with the lower A2 receiver, as you can see here, along with the A2 pistol grip. The big difference though is, if you notice here, the A1 style receiver, low receiver, as in this X7177 model here, there is a subtle difference if you look carefully. The two being that the front pin right here, where the pivot pin goes, where the receiver is, you'll notice a 90-degree shaped angle right here. And in the rear of the receiver, you'll notice that there's a small rib here for reinforcement, but mostly empty continuing space right here, not a whole lot of materials. When the A2 model came out in the early 80s, you'll notice that those changes were made where the front pivot pin here is now has a little bit more material, it's smoother, it's not that 90-degree angle, and it's been basically reinforced where the pivot pin is. And then in the rear, you'll notice that instead of that single little rib reinforcement, this whole section has now been added with extra material for reinforcements. Otherwise, stock remains, or the low receiver essentially remains the same. Now, one thing to point out though is that this model here, you'll notice that it's not U.S. government property marked. The reason being, these were only limited production. The Model 733 was basically introduced a system where it was never purchased in large quantities. Back in 1985 roughly is when they were introduced, around that time point, and at that time there were different variants of it. Colt just made made a Model 733 with whatever parts they had available. So sometimes they had an A2 barrel, sometimes they had an A1 or a pencil thin barrel, and it's just really whatever parts they had at hand. The upper receiver, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it can be very variable depending on whether it's an A1 upper or an A2 upper, or one of even those transitional A1 E1 upper receivers. But as you can tell here, that's where it gets confusion, but they're not property government marked because they were not purchased in large quantities, basically. So what happens, most of these were purchased by Delta just over the shelf, right? That's why they're just marked with a standard M16A2 lower. Compare that with the original. This is a very old model of a Car 15 designed back in the 60s, where you notice that's why these trays are really faded now at this point, and when they were actually purchased in large quantities. So this one is property government marked. Again, really rare in private hands. Going back to this model here, we kind of went over the lower receiver for a little bit right there. Now let's go into the upper receiver. As you can tell, this model here, quite distinctly, you'll notice this is the A2 upper model receiver with the brass deflector. Again, there were different variants that Colt made. There were still Model 733s, but they would have different variants. So one model would have the A1 upper carrying handle right here, where you'll notice that this is the original peep sight, or the flip sight right here, with the wheel for the windage back here. And this is a much simpler setup right here. A lot of folks like this A1 setup here. The A2 setup over here, maybe a little bit tougher for the average bear. This thing seems to work pretty well, right? Some folks actually would take it to the armory, cut this part down, remove this top, actually put a little Picatinny rail right here, put scope or anything like that on top of that part, and use it. Works like a champ. All right, that's what we did, and that's how it worked. Now, one thing's missing though. You'll notice that there's no brass deflector here. That's common though, well, not super common, but it's a part of the models. Some of the models included the A1 rear right here, but no brass deflector. Of course, they always have the A2 lower though, and A2 pistol grip. But some of the other models will still retain the A1 rear sight here, but they will have the brass deflector. That's the transitional upper. And then of course, this model right here happens to have the rear A2 rear sight with the brass deflector, the more current of the three models of the M733. Of course, all of them had fixed carrying handles right here though, like this one. The detachable ones didn't come out until later, until the 1994, essentially when the M4 series came out. But again, all of them are great. The only thing that's missing in this model, as you can tell probably, is the dive light flashlight at the front. Just kidding. Aimpoint 2000, great piece of kit, the one to start it all. That's what we're missing on here. Never leave home without it. Works like a champ. All right, moving on now. Going towards the slip ring. You'll notice here that compared to the Car 15 back in the 60s, These ones were here, old ones were just the straight slip rings. Now they're tapered, essentially. Same function, different little design separately. The classic Car 15 handguards, however, stays the same though. You'll know, and to many to this day, will still enjoy the old classic Car 15 handguards. They're slimmer, single heat shields, unfortunately, but they are still preferable to the bulkier M4 systems out here. Keep in mind though, that later on when the M4s came out, these were largely replaced. Moving on to the front sight post here, this is where it gets a little bit dicey. You'll notice that the same front sight post as usual, as you'll see. The bayonet lug below, there's been a lot of debate about this. If you look at certain sources, and they'll say that there's no bayonet lug. Truth to be told, I don't really know. If you flip through some of those catalog, Colt catalog numbers, you'll notice here that specifically there is a bayonet lug in there. So, would it make sense to have one? Probably not. But again, you probably wouldn't use it anyway. But just for historical accuracy, I think they do have one. This particular model did not include one though. But again, it fills in that same consistency and pattern in the confusion of the Model 733 and how just different parts were just put together for this specific model here. And it makes it a little bit hard to track down, especially for those who are looking for the exact real deal there. Moving on to the front of the system here. Again, one thing that is consistent though, that being said, is that they were all 11.5-inch barrels. Some of them included the full birdcage flash hider. This particular one comes with the A2 birdcage flash hider where the slot at the bottom, the ports aren't there. So that way it acts as not only a muzzle brake, but in addition to a flash hider. Now, one thing to note here though is the 11.5-inch barrel. Notoriously not that reliable sometimes. Maybe for short round counts and towards the short end of the range like that, no big deal, it can work. But towards larger quantity of round counts or under conditions where it's going to be a lot more less than ideal, we're going to see some suffering and reliability issues and stoppages here. The optimal length here is you need the 14.5. That's the shortest you can go to have to maintain that reliability and that carbine package here. Of course, the Commando version with the 11.5, a little bit cutting it short. Specifically, what we're talking about though is the distance from the gas port here all the way to the end of the muzzle. 11.5-inch barrel right here only has this much distance right here. You need the 14.5 basically out to here to have that ideal dwell time in order to keep that reliability up. So again, not super great, and it's plagued with reliability issues, but still, that's the price you pay for having a compact size right here. The common myth that you'll notice some folks talking about is that with an 11.5-inch barrel right here, you'll notice that the range would be mostly considered only effective up to maybe 150, maybe 200 yards. That's a common myth though. You see some pictures on YouTube, some guys, setting up some pork chops, some bags of oranges behind there, and up to 200 meters, you'll see that they're able to put through a 10.5-inch, and that's even shorter than this system here, a 10.5-inch barrel, and at 200 yards, it's still able to do significant damage. Yes, the muzzle velocity is significantly reduced in this model right here because of the 11.5-inch barrel, especially compared to either a 14-inch, 14.5, or even a 20-inch full-length system. That's just going to be significant muzzle velocity reduction. However, that doesn't mean that it's ineffective. It will still blow up those oranges up to 200 yards out there. So either way, while it's true it does lose some energy and some of the ballistics profile, you still don't want to be looking down at the end of the range one of these at that range there. All right, folks, so we're fixing to light this up Vickers tactical style right here. Today we'll be using Colt 200 gram BBs, so stand by.